I'm a little bit concerned we won't finish this. I'm kind of going fast, but then again, not fast enough. But of course, on the other hand, well, not fast enough to be able to finish all this. So I'll try. Okay? It's okay? All right. It's more important to understand. Did I already lose some of you? No, I agree. I totally agree. All right. But have I been too fast so far? Have I been too fast? Oh, okay. Depends on whom, in relation to whom.
We got an explanation of 4 tenets in 5 minutes. That's far too slow.
No, about the tenets, is that a little bit clear about the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantrika? That kind of division? Okay. Now, if you don't get all the details, that doesn't matter. If you don't walk away with being able to recite back to me what I just said, that's all right. But getting a sense that there is a reason for that gradual kind of approach, where philosophically, I don't know whether these philosophers, the way they're mentioned, ever existed. And that's not the point. It's about learning in that order. First being introduced to Vaibhashika and Sautrantrika. When we study philosophy, we're basically introduced to those two views initially. It's based on that, even though it's not expressed, it's not called that. Every now and then our teacher may say, oh, this is based on the Sautrantrika, right? And this is even a view of the Vaibhashika. But as like getting an understanding of the mind, for instance, when we talk about the mind as one of the first topics, we are taught from the point of view of the Sautrantrika. Blue is out there, shape and color is out there, and we just perceive it the way it is in front of us. That's very Vaibhashika, Sautrantrika view. Okay? But once we get to Refuge, we've already left behind this particular school or their views, and we are starting Parchin, the study of the implicit meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, which means we're already taking it from the point of view of the Madhyamika. And to add a little bit to the confusion, depending on which topic it is, sometimes we study the Chittamatra, sometimes Madhyamika, then again Sautrantrika. Logic is a lot of Sautrantrika, Chittamatra. So we even jump back and forth. And there's a lot of confusion. Confusion is seen as something good, because if you're confused, then you want to know more. So the texts are actually presented in such a way that it's not obvious to you right away what is meant, just to not discourage you guys. So when you feel confused, it's seen as something good. So you want to find out what's going on. But let me just say this much. Refuge here refers to, for the initial 2 philosophical schools, they say refuge refers to just the mind. You take refuge in the mind of a person and not the whole person. This makes sense, doesn't it? Right? Yes, that's as much as you need to understand here. That's most important. So what you call those minds, etc., it's just those special attainments. Okay? And with regard to a Buddha, it would be the mind that knows the Buddha's mind itself, that has extinguished, that has eliminated certain obscurations, and knows that those obscurations will never be produced again. That is the name of the mind of a Buddha. That's how it's described. Knowing about what has been removed, and that none of those things that have been removed come back. So omniscience does not refer to knowing everyone's mind simultaneously. They may go to say that you can know, if you focus on a person, if you focus on certain things, you can know in that moment, but you can only know one after the other if you pay attention to it. The higher Mahayana tenet schools, which are the Chittamatra and the Madhyamika, or the middle way, they think you can know everything simultaneously. Okay? And furthermore, so the Buddha's mental consciousness, that is the real object of refuge. And when it comes to the Sangha, it refers to either the Sangha jewel, it refers to either those minds, the minds of those people who are Aryas, but have not reached the state of Buddhahood yet, right? They're Aryas, but they're not. The only thing is that they say a Buddha jewel cannot be a Sangha jewel. Okay? They say if you're a Buddha jewel, you're not a Sangha jewel. In the higher school, Chittamatra and the Madhyamika, they say the Buddha is Sangha, the Buddha is Buddha. It's both. There's no problem. Here in this school, they insist if you're a Buddha, you're not a Sangha. Right? And that's kind of like our everyday kind of sense. You're Buddha or you're Sangha? But actually, you could be both. A Buddha is also Sangha. Right? A Buddha is also Sangha. But they don't see it that way. So they draw this distinction that they say, okay, the mind of a Buddha, that's always a Buddha. And then everyone else's mind, who's realized reality directly, an Arya therefore, who's not a Buddha, that is the Sangha jewel. That's it.
But in those schools, they actually don't think that there is emptiness. I mean, they see reality.
Yes.
So is there an Arya in this?
Yes, the selflessness. They only talk about selflessness, right? So a person who realizes, I'm glad you had that question, because just to emphasize it again, they don't talk about emptiness of other phenomena, they talk about just the mode of existence of the I. Okay? Because that's again overwhelming. Come on. It's hard enough to deny this, to deny the self. So you initially start off, only the self doesn't exist the way it appears. Everything else remains the same. Woof. Right? Okay. So, therefore, they only talk about consciousness itself, and that makes sense. And it actually makes sense initially. So don't have to worship a person. So initially, there were no depictions of the Buddha. There was no depiction of the Buddha, because mainstream Buddhism was mainstream, means that which went out, which was taught to the masses, was not the Mahayana tradition. It was taught secretly. So you had no Buddha statues. How is the Buddha depicted initially? Footprints, right? Just footprints. So they said sometimes they just, in like some paintings, you see just footprints. Those were symbolic for the Buddha. Okay? So like left an impression kind of idea. The Buddha left an impression. But either the Buddha was unimaginable, so therefore don't kind of picture the Buddha, or another explanation here, it's really the Buddha's mind. It's not the body. The person is not the object of refuge. So, since you can't depict a mind, and footprints are often like leaving an imprint, leaving a residue, so therefore, I'm not sure this is totally correct, but it would make sense. There's definitely the version you can't depict a Buddha, it's so beyond, so footprints are better, but there's also the idea, I guess, like, just because you didn't see the Buddha as an object of refuge. And statues were more widely spread later on. It was all kept secret. The Mahayana view was initially, or the higher view was initially not taught to the masses. That's why they're saying, in some traditions, and some scholars do that too, like I mentioned earlier, because the teachings were initially taught secretly, they were not generally known. And they only became more generally known later. And that's why some scholars say the Buddha never taught it, because it only appeared later. But that's not enough reason just because it appeared later, because if it was the case that it was taught secretly, it appeared later. So you can't infer just on the basis of that. Okay. So Vasubandhu, he supports this view, and he says in his 4th chapter of the Abhidhamma Kosha, whoever goes for refuge to the 3 goes for refuge to the Dharma that is taken to be the Buddha and the Sangha. So really the Dharma is the mind, right? The mind of these living beings that is taken to be the Sangha, that is taken to be the Buddha. So really you all take refuge, what you take refuge in is the mind of the Buddha, which from the Mahayana tenet school's point of view is the Dharma. Okay? The mind is not the Buddha, the mind is not the Sangha, that's the person. But in this tradition, they just talk about the Dharma really as the mind, and then they take the mind of a Buddha to be the Buddha jewel, and the mind of an Arya to be the Arya jewel. And then the teachings are still the Dharma, and the cessations are still the Dharma. Does that make sense?
Can you explain again
Pardon?
how they see the Dharma as the mind?
Yes, it's also the Dharma and the Buddha. It's also the Dharma and the Sangha. And the Dharma includes also the cessations, right? The truth of cessation. It includes the teachings as well. Possibly they saw the Dharma more as being the teachings. It's just not mentioned here.
So the Dharma jewel in this, in the Hinayana is like including the Buddha mind?
Wait, it says here, the Dharma jewel constitutes nirvana. The cessation of afflictive obstructions and the cessation of cognitive obstructions. So here it actually says, I didn't remember this, but it says that the Dharma jewel is just the cessation of everything. It doesn't include the mind. Okay, the mind is either the Buddha jewel or the Dharma jewel. Sorry, Buddha jewel or the Sangha jewel. So, I don't want to confuse you here. All you need to know is, it's the mind. It's not the person. No worship of a person. It's the mind. The mind of a Buddha is the Buddha jewel. The mind of an Arya is the Sangha jewel. And having eliminated obstructions with those minds is the Dharma, in the strictest sense. Okay? So, having eliminated obscurations. The elimination of obscurations, that's the Dharma jewel. Nirvana, yes. Nirvana is not a place. It's not a restaurant either. We used to have a restaurant, Hana Nirvana, Nirvana food in McLaren. So in Dharamsala I would say, jokingly, Nirvana is not a place, it's not a restaurant, because everyone knew the restaurant. It's a rock group. Oh, it's not that either. It's actually just the absence of afflictive emotions in a mind that previously existed, no longer exists now. Okay? And the word for, in Tibetan, it is having gone beyond misery. The word for nirvana in Tibetan is nyangde. Nyange means misery. Nyange le deva means having gone beyond. Okay? So it's just that state of having gone beyond the causes of misery. Okay? And that's the absence of, so this absences, we don't think like that, but think of remission of cancer. You're familiar with this non-affirmative term, remission from cancer. Here, it's a permanent remission from the afflictions. That's what nirvana is. It's a permanent, irrevocable. So like a remission can mean the cancer can come back or it may not come back. It includes both. Nirvana is, so the cancer would be like what's extra, something grows extra, so maybe use that analogy. Something that gives us a hard time, that harms us. So our afflictive emotions are extra in our mind. And so when you eliminate them so that they can never come back, that would be nirvana. So it would be an irrevocable remission from the afflictions. Does that make sense? We all understand remission. So some people say, oh, negations you can't know. But we use the word remission all the time from cancer. The remission from cancer does not refer to the body. It's just an absence of cancer. Okay. All right. So, having said all this, therefore, this is what Vasubandhu says. You could read this at your own. Never mind, I'll confuse you more if I read this now. But if you understand what I just said, that's most important. Okay? So, all right. Okay, so, this is what is really helpful here. One thing that comes to mind. So they take the mind to be the refuge. They take the mind to be the Arya. And you know what's really beautiful? Tibetans can really relate to that. Remember I told you about this nun who thought everyone is calling her a thief? Now this nun behaves terribly during the teachings. She fights with people. She calls nuns lay people. Like she calls them achala. That's a real abuse. That's a real insult. If you call another nun achala. Because acha means lady, but it means a lay person. So if you address another nun with achala, which is actually, it's like an older sister, actually, it means older sister. So it's actually an honorific term, but not used for a nun. So she calls all these nuns, and she thinks they're all not nuns. In her deluded state, she thinks she's the only nun. So she calls all the other nuns achala. That is such an insult. But she knows that. So, and then during the teachings, she fights with people, and they're always very respectful towards her because they have respect for her vows. They're able to differentiate. They don't have respect for her as a person because, of course, what she does, her mind is disturbed. So, with regard to this mental consciousness, with regard to that, they don't respect that. But they don't see her as just having that mental consciousness that is disturbed. They see she has vows. She has the vows of the Geshe. Well, hoping, but I don't think she's broken those. I don't think that, no. So I think she has her Geshe vows, her novice vows, I should say. She's a novice nun. And they're respectful towards that. They're respectful towards the robe she's wearing, but not so much the robe, but what they represent. Okay? So it's very beautiful to see these Tibetans. They still call her Churla, which is a respective form of saying Anila. So they call her that when she, whenever it requires respect, they're respectful. And if you ask them why, it's because she has the vows. So they respect the vows. So that's quite beautiful. That's a good reason. Everyone is Buddha nature. We should respect everyone. Okay? They don't go as far as that, but they specifically think of her vows. Okay? So in this way, this can be compared to respecting the Buddha in that case, because of the respecting a monk or a nun for their vows. Okay? This is how respect is possible, even if they act in a way that's inappropriate. Okay? So to still have respect, for instance, and this is so much more realistic with regard to seeing the person more wholly, as in like, see the whole person if you like. See, like time and again, someone is like really famous in the West, and then they make one mistake, and they go from being up there to be like the worst person ever. That's an extreme. Who wants to be? I don't want to be seen like that. I don't want to be defined by my mistakes, but we do it with other people all the time. So to see, there's also qualities in a person that no matter what they've done, to also respect the qualities. I think that is also important, but that doesn't mean the person shouldn't be disciplined, shouldn't be punished, but this kind of sense of like, ugh, like, everyone turning away from that person, treating them with total aversion and resentment and hostility. That is very painful for that person. And we don't set a good example because, for our children, etc., because the person is much more than that. So the Tibetans have a good way of doing this, especially when it comes to a nun misbehaving, for instance, or anyone misbehaving. If they know about good qualities, they still keep that in the back of their mind. So with the Tibetans who've done crazy things, there's one guy who works for the freedom of Tibet, but at the same time he's got some serious problems. So they still respect this person because they see these problems. He can be very abusive, but they also know what he's done. So they always distinguish, and there's always some respect left. I really, really like that. Okay, just as a side note, which I think is important. All right, so then there's a little chart here. It talks about, it kind of gives you a sense of, again, what it refers to, Sangha jewel, Buddha jewel, Dharma jewel, etc. All what I mentioned is right in this chart. If you want to read it again, that's just a summary of it. That's what I want you to remember. But there's a reason for why it is said that the Buddha is not a Buddha jewel. The Buddha himself is not an object of refuge. I think the main reason for this assertion is when the Buddha taught this. Why? Because he understood it was too difficult to worship a person sincerely. It was too overwhelming. So he didn't teach that. He said, focus on the mind. But there's also a whole story behind it, of course, because the Buddha was born and manifested just an ordinary person. In the Mahayanas, according to Mahayana philosophy, the Buddha was already enlightened. The Buddha was enlightened, came as an enlightened being to this world, and manifested ordinariness, being ordinary, to teach us. But of course, the story, as it is usually told initially, is that the Buddha was ordinary, was maybe on the path of preparation. That's usually what they say, path of preparation, but was still an ordinary person, hadn't realized reality yet, and then became enlightened in Bodh Gaya. That is not literally true, but if it were true, and this is according to these tenet systems that are set forth here by Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, Well, they say the Buddha was just an ordinary person because this was still an ordinary body. He was an ordinary person, hadn't realized reality yet, hadn't overcome samsara yet. So the body you're born with, the body the Buddha was born with, is still ordinary. Right? So in terms of, for instance, Milarepa, who became enlightened in one lifetime, from the Mahayana point of view, from the point of view of Tantra, he started off as an ordinary person. The body was an ordinary body. Okay? So his just totally ordinary body, eventually this body was replaced by an energy body, if you like. However, initially, this was literally an ordinary person because Milarepa had not entered a path yet, had not yet a special body. Okay? It was still a truth of suffering. So in that same way, here they think the same of the Buddha. That's the reason. Okay? So that the Buddha only attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, so his mind was special now, but the body is good old body. It's the result of karma and afflictive emotions. Versus once, in the Mahayana system, once you reach the path of seeing, that is, once you realize path of seeing means you become an Arya, you don't have to be liberated yet. Once there's the path of accumulation, path of preparation. That's when you're an ordinary person. Then you reach the path of seeing, which, by way of its name, we can come to see. You see things as they really are. You experience selflessness from the lower school's point of view, or the ultimate nature of all phenomena from the higher school's point of view. When you realize reality, that which you need to realize to become liberated, when you realize that, experience that for the first time directly, that's when you reach the path of seeing. From that level onwards, you can no longer be born in samsara under the control of afflictions and karma. Okay? Well, I should specify, sorry. When you're a bodhisattva. When you're a bodhisattva and you realize how phenomena really exist, you can no longer be reborn as an ordinary person in samsara. As a hero or solitary realizer, sorry, you can. Okay? Unless you become an arhat, you're in samsara all that time. But if you're a bodhisattva and you've reached the path of seeing, you can no longer be ordinarily reborn. Now you're reborn out of compassion. So you can choose your rebirth. This is how you can basically know when a Lama, like His Holiness the Karmapa, we know he leaves behind letters, and I found later on. So this, I think, to me, well, we haven't seen. If you're the person that the Karmapa gives a letter to, right? And then it says, I'll be reborn in this place, to my father's name is this, my mother's name is this, and 20 years or 10 years later, you go to this village and there's really a family whose father's name is this, the mother's name is this, and they have a little boy or a little girl at that age. Then you know, how can you leave behind a note? So the previous Karmapa did exactly that. He gave a little letter to Taisito Rinpoche, and that letter looked like a mandala, like a painting of a mandala, that you fold in a certain way, you put some strings around, and you wear it around your neck as a protection. Tibetans do that traditionally. So His Holiness the Karmapa, the previous one, gave this little piece of paper. It looked like just one of those blessings that you never look at, because it's just a painting of a mandala usually, or some writing. So you just keep it cleanly around your neck, or maybe leave it in your bag, whatever, as some kind of protection. They call it protection. So when they couldn't find the present Karmapa, he suddenly remembered, because he was thinking, where's that letter? He always leaves behind a letter, but they couldn't find it in his personal belongings. No one else knew anything about a letter. And so he opened up this thing he was wearing, he was keeping, safekeeping from the previous, and there it was. There it said, I'll be reborn at this day and age, or this day will be the day I'll be reborn, and this will be my village, my father's name is this, and my mother's name is this. And then they went to Tibet, and there was, in this village, I mean, come on, you have to be really clairvoyant to be able to say on that day, right? And there's a little boy, had the same age, mother's name was this, father's name was this, and that's how they found the Karmapa. So that shows he has at least reached the path of seeing. Because you can only do that, you can only choose your rebirth once you're in the bodhisattva, you realized the ultimate nature of phenomena, you've understood what you need to realize. So in the higher school it would be emptiness. So once you realize that, then you can choose your rebirth. So if you want to know when the Lama chooses his or her rebirth, if they've done so in an intentional way, then you know they've reached the path of seeing. Okay? If you wonder, how do we know someone is special? I think with this wholeness, the Karmapa, but of course, first you have to find out the story is true. But with this wholeness, the Dalai Lama, for instance, like, just look at his life story. Of course, again, it's a story. How do we know it's true? But of course, that needs also some time to believe that there was no reason for the people telling the story to lie. But yeah, many of the lamas choose their rebirth. Okay, we can't. I can't. I don't know about you. Anyway, so therefore we say that the Buddha was born with an ordinary body, which means that he hasn't chosen his rebirth yet. Can you still follow me, or am I?
But in the next lives, they take refuge in his body as well? Only in this life, when it's impure, they take refuge only in the mind?
Yes. If you are like, for instance, yes, exactly. Actually, you're not, well, in the higher schools, what they would say is, you're defined by your mind. You are labeled an Arya person based on your mind. So only if your body is impure, it doesn't mean you're not an Arya person. Because a person is labeled on the basis of mind and body, right? In the lower schools, they would say, well, the body, that's impure, therefore the person cannot be an Arya. So they don't want to take the whole person. Again, this idea, you can't really rely on someone, the whole person. You don't worship a whole person, it's the mind. Okay? In the higher schools, they do that. And so then there's a debate that Benjen Tsongkhapa, I'm just jumping here a little bit, but Benjen Tsongkhapa, he proceeds to cite a debate that arises from holding a view based on Hira tenets. So when they say that Buddha Shakyamuni's body is the truth of suffering, because according to their view, they was just ordinary, so the body is just an ordinary body. What is the truth of suffering? What is the definition of the truth of suffering? Is that which is the result of karma and afflictions. Okay? So our body right now is the result of karma and afflictions we accumulated in the past. That is responsible for the body we have right now. And so the Buddha's body is said to be that kind of body, if you believe the Buddha was born as an ordinary person and only became enlightened in that life. Now, if that's true, then they argue that there's said to be 5 very heavy crimes, or very heavy negativities, heinous crimes also called, or very heavy ones. Killing one's father, killing one's mother, killing an arhat, and drawing blood of the body of a Buddha while motivated by a non-virtuous mind, and causing a schism in the Sangha. So those are said to be really heavy karmas. Killing your parents is clear. Killing an arhat. Now you cannot kill a Buddha, but you can injure a Buddha. So technically, but if the Buddha's body is ordinary, why is this so bad? Why is it so bad to draw blood? Because it's just an ordinary body. So the mind of the Buddha, that's not ordinary. So therefore, how can that be such a heavy negativity? Heinous crime is a weird word. Just a really heavy negativity. Causing a schism in the Sangha is really negative because, well, if there's a schism, people may leave the Sangha. It causes a lot of disruptions to people's practice. This means specifically to monks and nuns, actually. But even if it causes schism in the lay Sangha, that's also very traumatic for a lot of people. So that all makes sense. But here with drawing blood from the body of a Buddha, this debate is mentioned here in this text, where it says, well, if it's the truth of suffering, what's the big deal? Right? It's just as bad as drawing ordinary person's blood.